She only meant to text her younger brother, but her fingers were shaking so badly they wouldn't obey her anymore. Blood from her split lip smearing across the phone screen, and that message landed in the hands of the most dangerous man in the city. 20 minutes later, the door of her shared apartment was kicked clean off its hinges, and the man whose name made the whole underworld hold its breath stepped across the threshold. Raylan Hart, 27 years old, lay on the cold kitchen floor, feeling every breath scrape against her left side like something inside her had just broken. She was a single mother who worked the bakery kitchen by day and cleaned empty offices by night, her hands rough from cleaning chemicals, her frame thin from sleepless nights and meals she'd given to her daughter instead. The only thing keeping her conscious right now wasn't the pain. It was the face of her 4-year-old girl sleeping safely at her brother's place, the child she'd promised to pick up in the morning. The man who walked in carried no weapon and wasted no words. August Rivers, 34, stood tall in a tailored charcoal suit, his short hair gone to salt and pepper, cold gray eyes sweeping the room like he was reading a map, the faint scar along his jaw shifting as he looked down at her. He didn't ask where she was hurt. He just held out his hand, palm up, and waited. A woman who'd never once been protected in her whole life, and a crime boss who'd never bent down for anyone. Neither of them knew that one wrong number dialed that night was about to tear the curtain off a money laundering ring, a traitor standing right beside him, and a secret even Raylan didn't realize she was holding. If you want to know what happens next, stay with us till the end. If this story moves you, hit that like button to keep us going. Don't forget to share this video so it can reach more people, and subscribe today so you never miss what's coming next. That hand remained extended in the empty space, strangely patient, and Raylan looked at it as though she were looking at a language she didn't know how to read. She had grown far too used to hands reaching toward her in another way, so used to it that her body folded in on itself before her mind could understand. But this hand didn't squeeze, didn't yank. It only opened and waited, and that waiting unsettled her even more than fear did. She lifted her trembling fingers, touched his palm, and in that instant of skin against skin, she felt him slightly adjust his stance, shifting his weight to bear the heaviest part for her. He pulled her up in one single movement, firm but careful, his arm slipping behind her back at an angle that avoided her left ribs entirely, as if he already knew exactly where inside her body something was broken without needing to ask. Standing hurt more than lying down, gravity dragged the pieces of bone against one another, and she clutched his arm with both her calloused hands, her eyes squeezed shut, breathing in short, shallow pulls until the dizziness receded. "Breathe slowly," he said, his voice low and flat, not comfort, but instruction. "I know how to breathe," she answered, her voice thick and hoarse. "Then breathe." From the living room, a second man stepped out, broad-shouldered, moving with the clean, efficient stride of someone who had done this work so many times that no motion was wasted anymore. "It's done," the man said, his eyes flicking quickly toward the motionless shadow on the sofa where Desmond lay. "He's restrained. He won't be getting up." August didn't turn to look. His gray eyes stayed on Raylan's swollen face, reading every line of it as though reading a damage report. "Marlowe," he said quietly. "Bring the car around." The man named Marlowe gave a single nod, then disappeared into the hallway. Raylan swallowed hard, the taste of blood still at the corner of her mouth, and the most important question of her life broke out before she could decide whether she should ask a stranger such a thing. "My daughter," she said. "She's 4 years old. She isn't here. She's with my younger brother. His name is Jonah. I leave her with him whenever I work the night shift." She heard her own voice break on the final word, and she hated that weakness, but she couldn't hold it back. August looked at her for one more second, and something very brief passed through the depths of his eyes. Not pity, but a cold acknowledgement, as though a number had just been adjusted inside his mind. "She's safe," he said. He didn't ask for her brother's address, didn't ask the child's name, didn't ask anything more, and it was the absolute certainty in those 2 words that made her want to believe him, and chilled her at the same time, because it implied that he already knew, that the information had been sitting somewhere before she ever opened her mouth. He helped her step through the doorway where the door was no longer there, matching the rhythm of every step she took. Not rushing, not pulling, just a steady support on her left side that she could lean her weight into. The building hallway was dark and quiet, with only the sound of their footsteps and her strained breathing echoing between the yellowed walls. The elevator was already waiting, its doors open. She stepped inside, leaned her back against the cold metal wall, and looked at the man standing beside her, the man whose name she hadn't even known half an hour earlier, the man who had just walked into her apartment and changed the course of a night she should have had to crawl through alone, the way she had every time before. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in a very long time, Raylan Hart didn't have to get herself up from the floor alone. The car was a dark sedan, nothing remarkable, the kind of vehicle that disappeared into the night traffic without anyone bothering to look at it twice. Marlowe sat behind the wheel, driving with the unhurried calm of a man who knew every road in the city by heart, and Raylan noticed that he changed direction 3 times at turns that seemed random but clearly weren't, as if there were already a map inside his head of safe places and places to avoid. A map no one else in the car was allowed to see. August sat beside her in the back seat, keeping just enough distance, not touching her, not leaning toward her, only the presence of a man watching her condition without wanting to add weight to it. He bent down, took a box from beneath the seat, not the kind of first aid kit someone grabbed in a hurry from a convenience store, but a serious, fully stocked set of supplies, and he placed it on the seat between them without telling her how to use it. She looked at the box for a while, then looked at him. He had turned his face away, gazing out the window, letting her decide for herself, and she was more grateful for that than she expected, because she had been tending to her own wounds long enough to know clearly what needed to be bandaged right away and what could be left alone. She opened the box with fingers that were still trembling, cleaned the split at the corner of her mouth, disinfected the scrapes on her palms, and wrapped a bandage around her swollen knee. As for her ribs, there was nothing she could do, because with broken ribs, there was nothing to be done except breathe as softly as possible and accept it. She did all of it in silence, each movement so neat and practiced that August turned to look at her for a moment, and in that look, there was something she couldn't read, perhaps the realization that this woman had grown used to stitching herself back together. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," he answered. That wasn't an answer. It's the only answer you need right now. She wanted to argue, but she no longer had the strength, so she turned and looked out the window, letting the city pass by in broken pieces. She had lived here her whole life, but she had never seen these streets from this angle, from inside a car like this, at this hour. She began to tremble, not from cold, but because her body was finally releasing the adrenaline that had kept her upright for hours, and the shaking spread from her shoulders down into her hands. August said nothing. He only removed his suit jacket, the movement quiet and without the slightest display, then laid it over her, covering her shoulders and chest, the fabric still warm with his body heat and faintly carrying something deep and clean. She meant to say she didn't need it, but she didn't, because she really did. "Thank you," she whispered, and he only gave a single nod, his eyes still facing forward. From the driver's seat, Marlowe spoke for the first time since they had left the building, his voice low and clear. "The route is clear," he said to August. "No tail. I checked all 3 points along the way." August answered with a soft sound in his throat, more an acknowledgement than a sentence, and Raylan realized that the man driving didn't only know the roads. He knew every place, knew the shelters, the exits, the hidden corners of the city in a way that only someone buried deep inside some kind of machinery could know. She tightened the edges of the jacket around herself, feeling its weight, and a cold intuition slowly rose within her, that she was sitting among a force whose outermost edge was all she had seen so far, and that tonight hadn't ended at all. It had only just begun to open into something far larger than the kitchen she had crawled out of. The place where they stopped was a penthouse converted from the top floor of an old warehouse, spacious and empty, clean but soulless, without a single photograph, without a single object suggesting that anyone truly lived here instead of merely passing through. Marlowe stayed downstairs in the car, while August brought her up in a freight elevator that required a keycard. Raylan sat down in the nearest chair, because her body had already decided that any choice that didn't involve sitting was a bad one. August stood by the large window overlooking the city speckled with lights, his hands in his trouser pockets, and for a long while he said nothing. Then he spoke, still without turning around. "The man you lived with," he said. "His real name isn't the Desmond you called him." She looked up. "His real name is Desmond Price," he continued, still looking outside, "and for the past 3 years he's been working as a courier for an organization called Callaway, moving money, moving information, jobs small enough not to draw anyone's attention at the higher levels." A pause, until about 6 weeks ago, when a large sum of the organization's money disappeared during a transfer he was responsible for. $1,800,000, he said, in a voice as flat as if he were reading a number off a page, vanished without a trace. And the organization believes either he took it or he knows where it went. Raylan stared at his back, trying to piece those words together into something that made sense. I don't understand, she said. What does that have to do with me? August turned around, and this time he looked straight at her. You clean for a living, he said. You have keys to many offices in the area. You move through those buildings at hours when no one pays attention, and no one questions a woman pushing a cleaning cart down a hallway at midnight. He needed that. He needed someone who could get him into places where he shouldn't be. Someone no one would suspect. Someone who wouldn't ask why he wanted to stop by her workplace after closing. The words fell onto her one by one, and Raylan felt something inside her slowly collapsing, not from physical pain, but from a coldness rising from the very bottom of her chest. She thought back over the past 8 months, the way he had appeared in her life exactly when she was at her most exhausted, the way he had shown a strange interest in her work, asking which buildings she cleaned, which nights she worked, which keys opened which doors. Questions she had once mistaken for the sweet attention of a man who had finally decided she mattered. The way he had sometimes borrowed her access card with the excuse of coming to pick her up, then returned it the next morning. The way he always knew exactly when she wasn't home. She had thought it was love. She had thought, after a whole life of never being chosen by anyone, that someone had finally chosen her. So even that was a lie, she said, and her voice was so small she wasn't sure he heard it. He never did. August didn't answer right away, and his silence was the answer. He approached you because you were useful, he finally said, with not a trace of cruelty in his voice, but not a trace of softness either. Only the truth laid out exactly as it was. Everything after that was just how he kept you standing still. Raylan sat there, her calloused hands lying flat on her knees, and she realized she wasn't crying, not because she wasn't hurting, but because she had grown too used to discovering that the things she thought were shelter were really only traps. She had trusted someone, and everything she thought she knew about him had been a version he built for her to believe in. Her ability to read people, she realized with a bitterness that came from someplace even deeper than tonight, had been broken for a long time. That night, Raylan didn't sleep. They gave her a room with a bed, clean and bare like everything else in this penthouse, and she lay down on top of the blanket without taking off her shoes, staring up at the ceiling, letting her body rest, while her mind absolutely refused to do the same. Every breath still made her ribs scrape against one another, but she almost stopped noticing it, because another pain had taken its place, a pain with no clear shape, the pain of someone taking apart every piece of the past 8 months and holding each piece under a new kind of light. She remembered the first time she met Desmond, in the very bakery where she worked the morning shift, when he walked in right as she was counting every bit of change to see whether she had enough to buy medicine for Posey, and he had paid for her coffee with a smile that made her feel seen for the first time in a very long while. Now she understood that he hadn't walked into that bakery by chance. She remembered the way he asked about her work schedule, not because he wanted to know when she was free to meet him, but because he wanted to know when the buildings she cleaned would be empty. She remembered the phone calls he secretly took out on the balcony, the times he came home near dawn with some strange smell on his clothes, the times he lost his temper for no reason, and then softened again in a way that felt suspicious. She had explained all of those things away with the kinds of reasons a person starving to be loved invents for herself. Work pressure, a difficult past, a wounded man who needed time. She had done the very thing she had once sworn she would never do, making excuses for someone who shouldn't have been forgiven, and she had done it again and again, because the deepest part of her still believed that if she was patient enough, gentle enough, good enough, then he would change. She sat up in the dark, wrapped her arms around her knees, and that was when she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. August stopped at the doorway. He didn't come in. He only stood there as though he too wasn't used to one of his homes having another person inside it. "You're not asleep," he said, not as a question. "I'm not used to anyone caring about me enough for me to feel safe enough to sleep," she answered. And she didn't know why she was being that honest with a stranger. Maybe because in the middle of the night, all defenses tended to grow thin. August was silent for a moment. Then he asked, "Without your brother and the little girl, do you have anyone else?" She shook her head. "My mother died when I was 9, she said. "I don't know who my father is. I grew up in the foster care system, one house after another, and nowhere kept me for very long. Jonah was the only one who stayed with me through all of it. even though we were separated several times, too. My whole life, no one has ever come through a door to protect me. She lifted her eyes to him in the darkness. Until tonight, she said softly. And that person is someone I still don't know whether I should fear or trust. August stood very still for a long time, and then something brief passed across his face. A fine crack in the cold surface she had been looking at all evening. And beneath that crack wasn't hardness, but something she hadn't expected. Something almost like understanding. As though he too knew very well what it felt like to grow up without a hand reaching out at the right moment. He didn't say he understood. He only said, "You should try to sleep," and turned away. But she had seen it in time, that one moment. And she knew this man wasn't as empty as he wanted people to believe. Near dawn, Marlowe returned. Raylan heard the freight elevator, then the sound of his footsteps crossing the floor, and the way he walked, one beat faster than usual, was enough to make her sit upright and step out of the room. Marlowe was saying something very quietly into August's ear in the far corner of the penthouse, and she caught only fragments, a name, a few scattered words, and then one word dropped into the room like a stone falling onto still water. Dead. August's face didn't change, but he stood, walked with Marlowe a few steps farther away, and the exchange that followed was not meant for her to hear, and most of it she couldn't hear anyway. But she had heard enough. Desmond was dead. Not the Desmond she once thought she loved, not the name she had attached to 8 months of her life, but Desmond Price, the organization's courier with the missing money, was dead. She stepped forward from where she stood, and both men turned to look at her. "He's dead," she said, not a question. August looked at her for one beat, then nodded. "When?" she asked. "During transport," he answered, "after we left the apartment." There was a brief pause, just long enough to answer the question she hadn't yet asked without having to say it aloud. The situation became complicated on the road. Raylan stood very still. She tried to search for what she was feeling, and it turned out to be harder than she expected, because what she felt couldn't be separated cleanly. It was layered over itself in pieces she couldn't untangle. Something that felt partly like relief and partly like a cold emptiness, and she didn't know what to call it, but she had no time to name it, because August went on, and what he said next was the thing that truly chilled her. "You need to understand what this means for you," he said. "The Callaway organization believes someone in their chain caused that money to disappear, and now the only person still alive with a direct connection to Desmond Price is you. In their eyes, you're an open end. They'll assume that a woman who lived with him for 8 months and had keys to the places he went must know something." She opened her mouth to say she didn't know anything at all, but he spoke before she could. "They don't care whether that's true or not," he said. "What they believe is what decides whether you're safe. And that's not all. A federal task force has been watching this network for some time, and Desmond's death has just turned you into what they need. A witness. They'll want you to testify. They'll use you to rebuild everything." Raylan dropped into the chair, because her legs could no longer be trusted. One side wanted her gone forever. The other wanted her to say everything, and she was trapped in the middle, a woman who only wanted to pick up her child that morning. "Posey," she blurted, and that name pulled her to her feet at once, despite the pain tearing across her ribs. "My child, my brother. If they can find me through Desmond, they can find Jonah too, and Posey is there." August had already raised a hand before she finished speaking. "I've handled that," he said. "My people will reach your brother's place within 1 hour, not to frighten anyone, but to bring both of them somewhere discreet, completely separated from everything that's happening, before anyone else has time to think of looking for them. The little girl won't know anything is wrong. To her, it'll just be an outing with Uncle Jonah." She looked at him, and for the first time that night, she felt herself wanting to believe someone that badly. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice rough and raw. "I don't put a child in the middle of this," he said, and there was a weight in the way he said it that told her it wasn't empty reassurance, but a principle, a line he had drawn for himself long ago. "What you need to do now is believe she's safe, so you can focus on keeping yourself safe, because both sides are about to close in around you, and they'll arrive sooner than you think." They moved her to a fallback location when the sun had risen high, a low-floor apartment in a residential neighborhood so ordinary it was almost invisible, a place where no one remembered a neighbor's face, and no one paid attention to unfamiliar cars. A woman named Delia was already waiting there, her short hair streaked with gray, reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, seated at a table crowded with computers and devices, with the calm of someone whose closest relationship was with data rather than people. Delia glanced over Raylan once, took in the injuries, then turned back to the screen without wasting a single word. August stood beside her, reading what appeared on the monitor, and Raylan sat down in a corner, trying not to get in the way of the quiet machinery moving around her. Everything seemed settled until nearly noon, when Delia took off her glasses, wiped them once, then put them back on. A small movement Raylan would come to learn meant the woman was about to say something bad. "Someone is watching the house across the river," Delia said. "The location you plan to use as the transfer point tonight." August turned sharply. "Calloway." "No," Delia answered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "The way they're set up doesn't look like the organization's people. Too clean, too patient, too procedural." She lifted her gaze to him, over the frames of her glasses. "And this is what doesn't sit right with me, August. Not all your locations are exposed. Only a few. The house by the river and the warehouse to the south. The others are still clean. The penthouse is still clean. This place is still clean for now." A thick silence settled over the room. Raylan didn't understand the full technical meaning of what had just been said, but she understood August's face, the way he went still in a manner different from his usual calm, the stillness of a man receiving information and not liking the shape of it. "If only a few points are exposed," he said slowly, almost to himself. "Then whoever leaked them doesn't know everything. Or," Delia continued, still looking at the screen, "that person knows everything and is choosing to release only pieces at a time." The sentence hung between them like something no one wanted to touch. Someone careless would have exposed everything at once. Someone leaking selectively was calculating, hesitating, holding something back. That was the kind of leak that came from someone very close. August said nothing more about it. He only turned to Marlowe, who had just stepped in from outside, and said curtly, "Get the car ready, we're leaving now." They left the apartment within minutes, but as soon as the car rolled out of the small street and merged onto the main road, Raylan felt the shift in the air before she understood why. A dark-colored car pulled away from the curb behind them and followed, keeping exactly the right distance, not too close to be obvious, not too far to lose them. "Tail," Marlowe said quietly, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. August didn't turn around. "Drive normally for 2 more intersections," he said, "then turn right when I tell you." Marlowe did exactly that. The car behind them still followed. August switched places with Marlowe in a hidden alley, sliding behind the wheel in a movement so neat it was almost unseen. And then he drove in an entirely different way, not faster, but smarter, threading through one-way streets, cutting across a parking lot to change direction suddenly, using the exact timing of a traffic light about to turn to leave the other car stranded on the far side of the intersection. When he finally pulled onto a quiet road and turned off the engine, the dark car was no longer in the mirror. The 3 of them sat in silence for a while, as the engine cooled. Raylan held tightly to her aching ribs, her heart pounding, and looked at the back of August's head in the dimming light. "They aren't Calloway's people," she said, repeating what she had just heard. "No," August answered, his eyes still on the outside. "And that's the problem. Because if they aren't the organization's people, then someone very close to me just told them where we were going." They moved to another location, a small house in an old neighborhood, and Delia came with them, bringing her entire table of equipment packed neatly into 2 suitcases. While August and Marlowe went out to handle things, Delia sat down at the kitchen table across from Raylan, placed a cup of coffee in front of her without asking, then looked at her for a long while over the rim of her glasses in a way that made Raylan feel as though she were a line of data being scanned. "How long have you been cleaning for a living?" Delia asked. "Almost 6 years," Raylan answered. "Offices, a few apartments, and for a while, hotels too." Delia nodded, as though the answer confirmed something she had already guessed. "Have you noticed," she said, "that you remember things other people don't?" Raylan frowned. "I don't understand what you mean." "Earlier in the car," Delia continued, "you described the route we took to lose that vehicle, and you remembered the color of the shop on the corner where August turned, remembered that there was a truck parked halfway across the entrance to the lot, even remembered the license plate of the car following us, though it only appeared in the mirror for a few seconds. Marlowe has been driving professionally for more than 10 years, and even he didn't notice that shop." She leaned back. "That isn't luck. That's how your brain has been trained to work." Raylan sat still, because no one had ever said that to her in this way before. When people clean, Delia said, they learn to look at a room like a picture, and they can tell immediately when something has been moved, when something is out of place, when something has just appeared or just disappeared. You do that every day, thousands of times, until you don't even know you're doing it anymore. You remember objects. You remember positions. You remember faces passing through hallways at hours when they shouldn't be there. That's a very rare kind of memory, and most people who have it don't even know they do. Raylan looked down at the cup of coffee, at the steam rising from it, and she felt something unfamiliar stir softly inside her chest. All her life, people had looked at her work as something lowly, something anyone could do. A woman pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways whose face no one bothered to remember. She had believed that. She had believed she was the kind of person who was easy to overlook, easy to replace, with nothing special to offer anyone. And now a woman who made her living seeing the truth inside piles of data was sitting across from her and telling her that the very work people looked down on had trained something in her that even formally trained professionals didn't have. I've never thought about it that way, she said softly. Most people don't, Delia replied. They think observation is passive. It isn't. It's a skill, and you're much better at it than you think. She tapped one finger once on the table. When your mind settles after all of this, you may be surprised by the things you remember without even knowing you saw them. Raylan didn't answer, but those words stayed inside her, settling into a place deeper than all the fear of the past few days. For the first time since waking on the kitchen floor, she didn't think of herself as an open end that needed closing, a burden someone had to protect, a woman who only knew how to crawl back up after every fall. She lifted the cup of coffee with both calloused hands and took a sip. And somewhere in her mind, almost beyond conscious thought, she began turning back through the hallways she had walked, the faces that had passed by, the things she had once seen but had never stopped to name. Delia figured it out in the late afternoon, and she didn't say it right away. She only called August over to the screen and let him read it for himself, because there are some things a person shouldn't have to hear from someone else's mouth, things they need to see with their own eyes. Raylan sat a few steps away, but she saw the moment August's face changed, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand lay flat on the edge of the table, and then slowly curled into a fist. 2 locations were exposed, Delia said quietly. The house by the river and the warehouse to the south. Do you know how many people had both of those addresses at the same time? August. He didn't answer. He already knew the answer. Only him, Delia, and one other person. Marlowe walked in through the back door at that exact moment, carrying a bag of food he had just gone out to buy, and he stopped in the middle of the room when he saw all 3 of them looking at him. For a moment, no one said anything, and Raylan felt the silence thicken, a silence unlike every other silence of the past few days, the silence of something breaking before it had made a sound. Put the bag down, Marlowe, August said. His voice wasn't louder, wasn't harsher, only frighteningly flat, the flatness of water before a storm. Marlowe set the bag of food on the table. He didn't deny it. That was what sent a chill down Raylan's spine. He didn't even bother pretending to be surprised. How long have you known? Marlowe asked, and his voice sounded tired, almost relieved. Just now, August answered. But I need to hear you say it. Why? Marlowe was silent for a long while. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, like a man who had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. I didn't take a penny from them, he said. You can dig through my accounts if you want. There's nothing there. They came to me 3 months ago, federal people, and I refused. I refused 2 more times after that. He lifted his eyes to August. Then that night at the docks happened, the night with the 2 Renner men. You remember? August said nothing, but something moved in his eyes. You went too far that day, Marlowe said, and this time there was a different weight in his voice. It wasn't work anymore. I stood there watching, and I asked myself whether the man I had followed for 7 years, the man who once had a line he would never cross, was still there. I didn't sell you to them for money. I gave them a few things, only a few things, enough for them to believe I was cooperating, enough for them to tighten around the Callaway organization that you and I both know needs to be taken down. But I held back far more than that. I didn't give them the penthouse. I didn't give them this place. I didn't give them her. He glanced toward Raylan, then turned back. I released things 1 piece at a time, because every time I was about to release more, I thought about 7 years, and my hand stopped. That's why you only found a few exposed locations. Not all of them. I could have burned your entire world down with a single text message. I didn't. The room sank into a kind of silence Raylan could feel in her bones. She looked at August, waiting for anger to explode, waiting for shouting, waiting for the thing she had grown used to seeing in men when they were betrayed. But August didn't rage. He stood there for a long time, and when he spoke, his voice was even quieter than before. You should have told me, August said. About the docks. About that line. I would have listened. Marlowe laughed, a short laugh with nothing joyful in it. You would have listened, he said. Or would you have handled me the way you handle every other problem? August didn't answer, and that silence was an answer both men understood. Raylan sat between them, between a 7-year friendship cracking open right before her eyes, and she realized she was witnessing something rare, a betrayal born not from greed but from something almost like conscience, and that made it hurt many times more than greed ever could, because no one in that room could say with certainty that Marlowe had been entirely wrong. Marlowe was taken into another room with one of August's men watching him, not tied up, not harmed, only kept somewhere August could see him, and Raylan understood that this too was a kind of principle, that he wasn't handling the man who had just betrayed him in the very way Marlowe had quietly accused him of doing. Meanwhile, Delia kept working silently at her screens, and it was she who called August over for the second time that day, this time with a different look on her face, a look that made Raylan stand up before anyone could say a word. This has to do with your brother, Delia said, and she said it directly to Raylan, not to August, which was what chilled her. Come look. Raylan stepped toward the table, one step at a time, and Delia turned the screen toward her. On it was an audio recording waiting to be played, and beside it was a stream of information Delia had intercepted from the task force's communication channel. Delia pressed the button, and then Jonah's voice filled the small room, her brother's voice, but not the voice she knew. It was rigid, too fast, too even, the voice of someone reading something someone else had written for him. Raylan, the recording said, I don't know where you are, but I need you to call me as soon as you hear this. They told me you're in danger, that the man you're with is a very bad man, that you've been taken somewhere. There are good people trying to help you, Raylan. They just need you to show yourself. Just go meet them, and everything will be all right. Please, I only want you to be safe. The recording stopped, and Raylan stood there without moving, because she had just understood the whole shape of what was happening. They found him through network provider data, Delia said softly, almost gently, a rare gentleness from her. The message you accidentally sent that first night, they traced the number back, found the number you meant to send it to, and that number belongs to your brother. They went to see him the next afternoon. They told him you'd been kidnapped, that the man you were with was a criminal, that the only way to save you was to cooperate with them. She paused. He believed them. Of course he believed them. They needed someone you trusted, someone you would listen to, someone who could lure you out of hiding without them needing to use force. Raylan felt the cold spread from her hands into her chest. They're using Jonah, she said, and her voice was strangely flat in a way she herself didn't recognize as the sign of something stretched to its limit. They turned my brother into the trap I'd never expect, because he's the last person on Earth I'd ever suspect. They turned the only phone number I wanted to call all that night into a door opening the wrong way. She thought of Jonah, 25 years old, a gentle mechanic who had never hurt anyone, the man who had kept an open invitation waiting for her for a whole year every time she refused, the man who had never asked too many questions when she needed help, only always said yes, I'll help you, whatever you need. And they had used that very kindness of his like a key. She thought of Posey staying with him, of that innocent belief that this was only an outing, and she saw every road she had been clinging to, every version of when this is over, I'll go home, running through Jonah, and Jonah was now standing on the other side of a door she could no longer walk through safely. August stood silently watching her, and for the first time in days, he had no answer to give. Raylan sat down at the table, both hands wrapped around the cup of coffee that had gone cold, and she let her mind do the thing Delia had said it had been trained to do. She didn't try to force it. She only let the old hallways drift past, the apartments she had once cleaned, the nights Desmond came home late, and then something rose to the surface, something she had seen but had never stopped to look at clearly. There was a man, she said slowly, and the whole room turned toward her. There was a man who came to the apartment 3 times during the final month. Always after midnight. Always stayed less than half an hour. I never heard his name, because Desmond always told me to go into the other room. But I remember him. August stepped closer. Describe him, he said. Somewhere past 50, she said. Thick, built, but not fat. The weight was in his shoulders and chest. Silver hair, cut very neatly. He drove a large, dark-colored car, and he always parked half a block away instead of in front of the building. She stopped, because another piece of memory had just clicked into place. Once, he took off his coat and draped it over a chair, and after he left, when I was cleaning up, I lifted the coat to hang it properly, and something fell out of the pocket. A casino chip. I picked it up and put it back on the table so Desmond could return it to him. I only held it for a few seconds. Delia had already straightened in her chair, her glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. Do you remember what it looked like? She asked. Raylan closed her eyes. She didn't remember the number on it. She had never looked at the number. But she remembered something else. The thing her eyes had photographed without her even knowing. Exactly as Delia had said. Dark green, she said, with a gold rim around the edge. And in the middle there was an image. A bird with its wings spread, like an eagle or a hawk or something. And beneath it there were a few letters intertwined. I remember because at the time I thought it was strangely beautiful. More beautiful than something that should have been in the coat pocket of a man like that. Delia had been typing before Raylan even finished speaking. She pulled up a series of images and turned the screen toward Raylan. Was it this one? Raylan looked, and her heart tightened slightly. That's it, she said. August bent down to look at the screen, and Raylan saw something change in his face, a recognition that was not simple at all. Solt, he said quietly. Henrik Solt. Delia nodded, her fingers still moving across the keyboard, connecting pieces of data with the speed of someone who had finally found the missing link. This is his casino, she said. On paper, it belongs to a shell company, but the person really running it is Henrik Solt, and Solt is Calloway's financial liaison. She looked up at August. If he personally came to meet Desmond 3 times after midnight, then he wasn't only coordinating from a distance, he was directly involved. And if that $1,800,000 passed through his hands, then maybe it never really disappeared at all. The whole room fell silent as the truth slowly became clear. The money wasn't lost, August said slowly, almost to himself. It was laundered through that very casino. The whole hunt for the courier who lost the money was only a performance. Solt needed someone to blame, and Desmond was the perfect scapegoat. And anyone who could place Solt in that apartment, on those nights, during the window when the money was supposedly lost, was the only real threat to him. He turned to look at Raylan, and in that look there was something she hadn't seen from him during all these days. A complete reappraisal. They aren't chasing you because you know where the money is, he said. They're chasing you because you're the only living person who can identify Henrik Solt. Raylan sat very straight. For the first time, she wasn't an open end that needed to be closed. She was the missing piece that could overturn the entire game. Raylan asked Delia to play the recording one more time, and this time, she didn't listen to it with the breaking heart of a sister, but with the ears of someone who had lived beside Jonah her whole life and knew every fold in the way he spoke. She closed her eyes and listened again, sentence by sentence, and near the end, she stopped Delia. Play that part again, she said. The sentence just now. Delia rewound it. Jonah's voice sounded again, talking about how he only wanted her safe, and then he added a sentence she had missed the first time because she had been too stunned. He said, "Do you remember when we were little? When Mom planted those climbing roses behind the house, and you were always the one who watered them?" Raylan opened her eyes. "Not climbing roses," she said softly. August and Delia both looked at her. "My mother never planted climbing roses," she went on, and something began to come alive beneath her voice. "She planted marigolds, a whole long row of orange ones along the fence, and she made Jonah water them, not me, because I always forgot. Jonah knows that better than anyone in the world. He would never get that wrong." She stood up, and this time the pain in her ribs could no longer hold her back. "He said it wrong on purpose," she said. "He knew someone was listening, knew they were making him read something already written for him, so he planted a mistake only I would recognize, to let me know those words weren't his. He's telling me not to trust that message." Delia leaned back, the faintest smile passing across the corner of her mouth, the closest thing to admiration Raylan had ever seen from her. Your brother is smarter than people think, she said. August didn't smile, but there was a very small softness in his eyes. So he didn't betray you, he said. He's trying to protect you from inside their trap. Yes, Raylan said. And now I have to let him know that I understood. She turned to Delia. Is there a way for me to send him something only he would understand? Something that won't go through his phone, not through the number they're listening to. Delia thought for a moment. There is one way, she said. Your brother has an old account on a photo-sharing site he almost never uses anymore. They're watching his phone and his direct communication channels, but almost no one thinks about an account that's been asleep for years. If you send something there, just one picture, no words, no location, it'll sit there waiting for him quietly. They won't catch it, and even if they see it, they won't understand what it means. Raylan nodded. She knew exactly what to send. She asked Delia to search online for an image of an old toy, a blue-painted tin robot with chipped paint, the kind of toy from years very far away. When the two siblings were small and were moved from one foster home to another, they had only been allowed to carry very few things, and Jonah had always insisted on keeping that robot, holding it in his arms on every car ride, because to a child who owned almost nothing, the one object that followed him through every door was an entire world. Every time Raylan was afraid in a new place, Jonah would set the robot on her bed and say, "As long as it's here, we still have each other." No one else in the world knew about that robot. Delia found a picture that looked close enough, and Raylan looked at it for a long while, then nodded. "Send it," she said. Delia posted the picture to Jonah's sleeping account, without a single word, without any trace leading back to where they were. Only an old blue tin robot appearing quietly among photos no one had touched in years. A wordless message that only one person in the whole world could read. "I'm okay. I know what you're doing. Don't trust them." And Raylan stood there, looking at the screen, for the first time in many days feeling that she wasn't only someone passively waiting for disaster to fall, but someone who had just quietly reached a hand through the darkness to grasp her brother's hand on the other side. The plan took shape quickly, because there wasn't much time left. August would go to Solt's casino as a party wanting to negotiate, a false offer to settle the money and let the matter of Desmond go, tempting enough that Solt would have to appear in person. The real purpose wasn't negotiation. The purpose was to force Solt to show himself somewhere with cameras, so Raylan could confirm that he was the same man who had come to the apartment 3 times after midnight, and so Delia could access the surveillance system and preserve the evidence. Delia sat beside Raylan for an hour, teaching her what she needed to do. And it was only one thing. "You'll sit in the car," Delia said, pointing at the laptop screen where the feeds from the cameras she had breached were displayed. "You won't go inside. You won't get out of the car. You'll only watch these screens. When Solt appears in the frame, you tell me, clearly, certainly, that it's the right man. Even one word is enough. After that, your part is done." Raylan looked at the frames, memorizing which angle showed the main lobby, which angle showed the entrance to the private room, which angle looked out over the parking lot where Solt would step out of his car. She nodded. "I can do it," she said. And she believed it, because this time they didn't need her to do anything except the very thing she had done all her life: look and remember. They checked the communication equipment again, a small earpiece so she could hear August and Delia, and a microphone so she could report back. Marlowe wasn't part of it this time. He was still being kept at the old house, and his absence left a space that August filled with 2 other men, quiet and capable. When everything was ready and the others went out to prepare the car, August lingered in the room with Raylan for a little while longer. He stood near the window, looking outside, then turned back to her, and for one moment, he wasn't the man who coordinated everything in the flat voice she had grown used to, but a man weighing whether to say something. "I need you to promise me one thing," he said. "No matter what happens in there, no matter what you hear through the earpiece, no matter how badly everything seems to be falling apart, you don't leave the car. You don't step out. You don't come looking for me." Raylan looked at him. "And what if something happens to you?" she asked. And she was surprised that she had asked it. Surprised by the weight inside the question. "Then you still stay in the car?" he answered without the slightest hesitation. "Because if you step out to save me, then both of us are lost. And your daughter loses her mother because of a man whose name you didn't even know last week. I'm not worth that trade." There was a naked honesty in the sentence that Raylan couldn't argue with. She was used to men who placed themselves at the center of everything. This man had just told her that his life wasn't worth more than her chance to get back to her child. "I'll stay in the car," she said softly. "But you have to promise me something too." August raised an eyebrow, a small gesture in place of a question. "You have to walk out of there," she said. "I've watched too many people leave my life through doors they never came back through. I don't want one more." He looked at her for a long time, and she saw it again, that thin crack across his cold surface, a little wider than it had been before. He didn't promise, because she had begun to understand that he didn't promise things he wasn't certain he could keep. But he nodded, a very slight nod, and sometimes from a man like him, a nod carried more weight than an oath. Then he turned away, and the night began. The car was parked in a dark corner of the lot diagonally across the street, close enough to catch the signal, far enough that no one would notice. Raylan sat in the back seat with Delia's laptop open on her lap, the earpiece fitted tightly, and on the screen were 6 small divided frames, the main lobby glittering with lights, the entrance to the private room, the rear parking lot. She knew Posey and Jonah were far from this place, safe in a discreet house under the watch of August's people, the little girl either sleeping or playing without knowing this night even existed, and that thought alone kept her hands steady enough to do what she needed to do. Far from this. Through the earpiece, she heard August step inside, heard his calm voice greeting Solt's men, heard the way he built the false negotiation as if it were real. Delia whispered from the front seat, her eyes fixed on her own screen, tracking every door August passed through. Then, in the frame showing the rear parking lot, a large dark car slid in and stopped, parking some distance from the entrance, exactly the way Raylan remembered. A man stepped out. Raylan leaned toward the screen and held her breath. He was past 50, heavily built, the weight gathered in his shoulders and chest, his silver hair neatly cut, and the way he moved, slow and certain, like a man used to being surrounded by others, matched every piece of memory she had pulled from those nights in the old apartment. "That's him," she said into the microphone, her voice low but not trembling at all. "That's Henrik Solt, I'm sure. Same build, same way of parking. It's him." Delia tapped a few keys to confirm that she had captured it, and in Raylan's earpiece, she heard August answer with a low sound in his throat, the sign that he had received it. Her part was done. Everything should have been able to end there. But Solt was the kind of man who had survived to his age because of an instinct no performance could completely get past. On the screen, Raylan saw him pause in the middle of the lobby, tilt his head toward August, and even though she couldn't hear the words, she could read the change in the posture of both men, the way the people around Solt suddenly shifted and began closing in. In the earpiece, August's voice remained even, but a new wire of tension had slipped underneath it. "He knows something's wrong," August said quietly, almost only for Delia and Raylan to hear. "I'm pulling out." Then everything happened fast. Across the frames, Raylan saw movement erupt in several boxes at once. Solt's men rushing toward August and his 2 men backing toward the planned exit, and even though the cameras carried no sound and she had been told she didn't need to see clearly, she still saw enough for her heart to tighten. Figures crashing into one another. A fall. A door shoved open. She gripped the edge of the laptop, repeating her promise in her head over and over. "Don't leave the car. Don't leave the car." Even as every cell in her body screamed for her to do the opposite. Through the earpiece, there was only hard breathing, footsteps, Delia's calm voice guiding him out. Turn left, through the kitchen door, out the delivery exit. Then silence. A silence that stretched long enough for Raylan to feel it like a hand tightening around her throat. And then the front door of the car flew open. August slid into the driver's seat, breathing heavily, one hand pressed against his ribs, and under the smeared glow of the streetlights, she saw that his shirt was torn along one shoulder, darkened there. He was alive. "Go," he said, his voice still trying to stay flat even though his breathing had betrayed him. "They're coming." He started the engine, and the car shot into the night, and Raylan leaned forward from the back seat, one hand settling on his uninjured shoulder, not out of panic, but so he would know she was still there, still sitting in the car exactly as she had promised, and that this time, the person who had stepped through that door had come back. They reached the old house when it was already late, and after Delia finished checking that no one had followed them, August finally allowed himself to sit down in the chair at the kitchen table, slowly, carefully, in exactly the same way Raylan had sat down on that first night. She took the serious first aid kit from the cabinet, the same kind as the one in the car that night, and set it on the table before standing in front of him. "Let me," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded and removed the torn shirt. The wound on his shoulder wasn't as deep as she had feared when she saw the dark stain beneath the streetlights. A long cut running down the muscle of his shoulder, no longer bleeding but still needing to be cleaned and bandaged properly. She worked in silence, her calloused hands becoming strangely gentle now, cleaning, disinfecting, pressing the bandages into place with the precision of someone who had stitched herself back together so many times that her hands knew what to do on their own. August sat still beneath her touch. He didn't move, didn't speak, only watched her face from very close, and she could feel the strain inside that stillness, the restraint of a man unused to being cared for by someone else, and having to decide how to exist inside it. "You're not used to this," she said softly, without looking up. "No," he answered. "I wasn't used to it either," she said. "All my life, I only ever bandaged myself. The first time someone else did it for me, I didn't even know where to put my hands." She pressed the final bandage down and smoothed it flat. "You have a lot of scars," she said, her eyes moving over the old marks on his body, each one a story she didn't ask about. He was silent for a while. "This one," he said, lifting a hand to touch the faint scar along his jawbone that she had noticed on the first night, "is from when I was 15. Before I became anything people were afraid of. Back then, I was just a kid in the harbor district, with no home, no one watching over me, learning how to survive by becoming harder than the people who wanted to hurt me." He lowered his hand. "I built my whole life so I'd never have to lie on a floor again, waiting for someone to come save me." Raylan's hand stopped. She understood that sentence in a way very few people in the world could, because she too had once been the child waiting for a hand that never came. "So that's why you came that night," she said slowly, "even though you owed me nothing. A misdialed number landed on your phone, and you came." August looked at her. "I don't know why I came," he said, and it was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. "I've asked myself that many times. I don't rescue people. That isn't what I do. But that message said someone was hurt and needed help, and something in me got up and walked out the door before the reasonable part of me could stop it. Maybe I saw my old self in those few words." They sat silently for a while, two people full of wounds from different places, in the quiet kitchen in the middle of the night. She closed the first aid kit. "Thank you," she said, "for not making me feel like I had to be grateful to you from the very beginning. You've never made me feel indebted to you. That's rare." August looked at her, and this time he didn't rush to speak. He let the silence between them be what it was. "You don't owe me anything," he said at last. "You got yourself up from that floor with your own strength. I only held out a hand. You were the one who took it." And in the way he said it, Raylan heard not flirtation, not pity, but something she had never been given in her entire life. Respect, whole and without condition, from someone who looked at her and saw not a burden that needed sheltering, but a human being who had walked through fire on her own. The days that followed moved to a different rhythm, slower but no less tense, the tension of untying each knot instead of dodging around them. The evidence Delia had recorded from the casino, together with what Raylan could testify about Henrik Solt, changed the entire direction of the federal task force. When August had his lawyer open a careful channel of communication with them, the message was very clear. The person they truly needed wasn't August Rivers, but the man who had laundered the money and staged an entire performance to hide it. Raylan's testimony placed Solt inside Desmond's apartment on the very nights the money was supposedly missing, and once the investigators knew where to look, the flow of money through the casino began to appear clearly, like an ink stain spreading across paper. Without Solt, and without the funds he controlled, Calloway's financial network collapsed from within, because that had always been the thing keeping the whole organization alive. The lawyer arranged things for Raylan in a way she didn't have the expertise to do for herself, an agreement in which she cooperated about Solt, only about Solt, and in return, her name wouldn't appear in any records the public could access. She was the victim of an abusive relationship, accidentally pulled into something she had never known about, and when the truth was presented as it really was, it spoke for her. In the middle of everything being untangled, August had Marlowe brought out. They met in the living room of the old house, the two men standing across from each other, and Raylan sat quietly in a corner, because August hadn't asked her to leave, and she understood that it was also a deliberate choice. "You're free now," August said. Marlowe looked at him, waiting for a trap that never came. "You're letting me go?" he asked. "After everything?" August was silent for a long while. "I've thought a lot about that night at the docks you mentioned," he finally replied. "About that line. You said I crossed it. And you were right. I didn't realize how far I had slipped until you forced me to look back. You betrayed me in the worst way possible, but you did it because you were still holding on to something I had dropped somewhere along the way. I can't punish you for that without becoming exactly the version of me you were afraid of." Marlowe stood there, and for the first time in the whole story, Raylan saw something break open in that hard man's eyes. 7 years, he said softly. August nodded. 7 years, he repeated. "Go find a cleaner life than the one I dragged you into, Marlowe. One of us should be able to do that." Marlowe looked at him for another moment, then nodded, and he left not like a traitor being cast out, but like a man who had just been handed back something he thought he had lost forever. When the door closed behind Marlowe, the room went quiet, and Raylan realized she had just witnessed something she would think about for a very long time. A man with enough power to destroy another person choosing compassion instead, not because he was weak, but because he had finally understood that real strength lay in knowing when to let go. A few days later, Delia handed Raylan a piece of paper with several phone numbers and the name of an organization. "This isn't my job," Delia said in her familiar, gruff voice, which hid a softness beneath it. "But when all of this settles down, you're going to need more than a legal agreement. This is a support line for people who've been in situations like yours. They help with housing, counseling, starting over. You don't have to go through the rest of it alone. There's an entire system built for people exactly like you, and reaching for it isn't weakness. It's the smartest thing you can do." Raylan took the paper, looked at the numbers, and for the first time, she didn't see needing help as an admission of failure. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her pocket as though putting away something valuable. "Thank you," she said. Delia only gave a little grunt and turned back to her screen, but Raylan had already caught it. Beneath the rims of those glasses, a brief flicker of something very much like joy. On the morning they told Raylan it was safe to reunite with her family, she woke before the sky was fully light. Not from fear, but from a kind of anticipation her body had almost forgotten how to feel. Marlowe was no longer there, and August was handling the final pieces of the arrangement. So one of his quiet drivers took her to a small house in the suburbs, where Jonah and Posey had been kept safe over the past several days. She stood before the door for a while, her hands clasped tightly together, and she realized she was trembling. Not because of pain, because her ribs were much better now, but because of a very human fear that perhaps her daughter would see something different on her mother's face, that perhaps everything she had just been through had left a mark on her that a 4-year-old child would somehow feel. Then the door opened, and Jonah stood there, and before she could say a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, carefully, gently, in the way of someone who could see his sister was hurt, and adjusted himself without needing to be told. "I knew you'd understand," he whispered into her hair. "The robot. I saw it. I knew right away that you were okay." Raylan laughed, a choked sound tangled with tears, and she held tightly to her brother, the only person who had stayed with her through all the doors of their childhood, the person still smart enough and loving enough to tuck a marigold into the middle of a trap. Then she heard small feet running across the wooden floor, and a clear little voice calling Mommy, and everything else inside her fell away. Posey rushed into her legs, hugged her, and looked up with a radiant face untouched by fear, because to the little girl, the past few days had only been a long, exciting vacation at Uncle Jonah's house, with the neighbor's dog to play with and pancakes for breakfast. "Mommy!" the child cried. "Uncle Jonah showed me how to change a tire, and I got to name the neighbor's cat Sir Whiskers." Raylan knelt down, slowly because her ribs still reminded her, and pulled her daughter into her arms, burying her face in Posey's child-sweet hair, and she let herself stay inside that moment for a long time, breathing in the scent of normal life, of safety, of the reason she had crawled off the kitchen floor that night, instead of lying still and surrendering. "She doesn't know anything," Jonah said softly behind her. "I kept it that way." To her, these were just a few fun days. "Thank you," Raylan said, her voice tightening, "for keeping her, for being sharp enough to save both of us with the name of a flower." Jonah only shrugged in that way of his, as if it were nothing important, though both of them knew how important it truly was. They sat down at his kitchen table, and Jonah made coffee, and Posey climbed onto her mother's lap, and talked without stopping about the dog, about Sir Whiskers, about how Uncle Jonah had promised to teach her how to pump up a bicycle tire. And Raylan sat there, one arm around her child, listening, and she faced the hardest thing of all, not the cartel, not the federal agents, but learning how to trust herself again. She had trusted the wrong person and had nearly lost everything. She had once thought her ability to read people had been broken forever, but sitting here, between the two people she loved most in the world, she realized something else. She had read Jonah correctly through a flower. She had read August correctly enough to trust him with her life. She had read Delia correctly, and even the truth of who Desmond really was, though it had come late. Her judgment had never been broken. It had only once been defeated by someone who had chosen to deceive her, and that was the deceiver's fault, not hers. She held Posey a little tighter, and for the first time in many years, Raylan Hart allowed herself to believe that she could trust herself. 4 months later, on an early autumn morning, Raylan Hart stood behind the counter of a small bakery bearing the name she herself had chosen, breathing in the scent of baked dough and caramelized sugar and freshly brewed coffee. The scent that now belonged to her life, not to a place where she was only hired help. When everything had settled, August once offered her money, enough that she would never have to worry about food or shelter again. And she refused, not out of pride, but because she understood that if she accepted it, she would once again become someone lifted up by another person, instead of standing on her own 2 feet. The only thing she accepted was help enrolling in a baking course, because that gave her a skill, not a gift. And from that skill she had built this shop. She hired 2 other women, both of them coming from the very support network Delia had placed into her hands that day. 2 women who had once believed they had nothing left to give the world, and every morning, watching them knead dough with hands that grew steadier day by day. Raylan saw repeated in them what Delia had once said about her, that no one was useless, that the society so used to glancing past people often contained the most resilient souls of all. Posey was healthy now, going to school every day with a lunchbox that held one small pastry her mother made just for her. And the little girl had named every animal in the neighborhood, because that was what she was best at. One afternoon, someone delivered a wooden box to the bakery, with no sender's name, and when Raylan opened it, inside was a baking tool set, the finest she had ever seen. Molds and knives and scales she had stood looking at for a long time in the store, but had never dared buy. Beneath it was a small card, only one neat handwritten line. "You were always the one who got back up on your own. I was only lucky enough to be there on the night you needed a hand." She stood there for a long time with the card in her hand, and she smiled, because she knew that man had never been good at saying such things aloud, so he had said them in the only way he knew how. They still saw each other, not often, with no rush in it, only sometimes on a Sunday afternoon after the bakery had closed, 2 people carrying old wounds slowly learning how to trust something new, not forcing it to move faster than it was ready to, and standing in the middle of her own small bakery, with her daughter healthy, with 2 women beside her finding their lives again. Raylan finally understood something a whole lifetime of hardship had never taught her, that she had never been anyone's burden, that a person's dignity is never measured by whether they're rich or poor, whether they hold a grand profession or clean empty hallways at midnight, but by the way they rise, by the kindness they manage to keep after everything, and by whether they dare to believe in their own worth. She had once thought survival was everything, but now she knew survival was only the foundation, the bare minimum, and what we build on that foundation, in ordinary mornings and cups of coffee and kindness, slowly finding its way back. That is what real life is. Through Raylan's story, may each of us remember that no circumstance, no matter how difficult, can define the true value of a human being, that kindness offered at the right moment can change an entire fate, and that every one of us deserves respect and the chance to believe in ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share the video so we can listen to more meaningful stories together every day. How do you feel about Raylan's story? And what part of her journey moved you the most? Please leave a comment and share the feelings from deep within your heart. We always read them and truly hope to hear from you. Thank you for staying until the very end of the story. I wish you and the people you love abundant health, a joyful life, peace, and calm every day. Goodbye, and I'll see you again in the next videos.